as much as we all know that we need to preserve biodiversity, I think that doesn't always get linked to the cultural diversity piece. And it's just saying, it's not just about like the social science of conversations around diversity and equity. It's about the way that that's imprinted in all of us, like this relationship between, the things we find delicious or beautiful or useful, the medicines we've made, like the ways we've found of relating to our environments. So just trying to include more perspectives that have been, either ignored or deliberately dispossessed of having a place and having agency and self-determination in that system. Like asking, just our surly old Korean ajamas, like, hey, you're the experts here. What does a cabbage need to be a good kimchi cabbage? Just what should it taste like? What should it look like? What is the through line as they kind of evolve in respect to the conditions that are changing and our landscape and the ways that they're changing to like a new home in these different environments? What's the tether that makes all of this still legible to each other? And who are we accountable to?
Welcome to episode 3 of the Seed Growers Podcast. I'm Dan Brisebois, seed grower at Tournesol Cooperative Farm and spreadsheet and crop planning enthusiast. With the Seed Growers Podcast, I want you to get inspired to go out and save some seed on your farm. This episode's guest is Kristyn Leach of Namu Farm. Kristyn grows vegetables and seed crops in Winters, California. Kristyn is part of Second Generation Seeds, a collective of Asian American growers devoted to helping communities of the Asian diaspora discover and deepen their cultural heritage through seeds. In this episode, Kristyn talks about managing her spring plantings to deal with symphalan pressure with the added challenge of high-salt irrigation water, about managing a growing seed company out of her home, how she sells vegetables and how seed production influences the crops she grows, about the Seed Steward program, an 8-month farmer-led journey exploring Asian and Palestinian heritage crops, what participatory breeding looks like in a Napa Cabbage selection project by getting feedback through annual kimchi making events, what it's like running a lo-fi seed operation out of your garage, and what seed cleaning steps happen on farm. For this episode's technical deep dive into a seed crop, Kristyn walks us through growing perilla for seeds from plant selection through harvest and cleaning. She also discusses the influence photoperiods have on flowering, and also seed dormancy. This episode is sponsored by the Organic Seed Alliance. Organic Seed Alliance is a US-based nonprofit that advances ethical seed solutions to meet food and farming needs in a changing world. OSA's work ensures an abundant and diverse supply of ecologically grown seed tended in perpetuity by skilled and diverse communities of seed stewards. To advance this mission, we serve growers working with seed at any scale through participatory research, practical education, policy advocacy, and network development. Join our online seed community at organicseedcommons.org, search our resources at seedalliance.org, and read recommendations for advancing organic seed at stateoforganicseed.org. On a personal note, I also want to mention the Organic Seed Conference that OSA puts on every 2 years. I first went in 2008, and I learned so much about growing seed and the business of seed during the conference, and met so many seed growers, breeders, and seed companies. It was the single most influential and formative experience in my seed growing career. If you're serious about seed, you should give it a try. This episode is also sponsored by the Bauta Family Initiative on Canadian Seed Security. Seedheads is the cross-pollinating podcast where our Canadian seed heroes tell their stories, share their how-to tips, and talk about the seeds they love. Join Steph Benoit and Hugo Martorell as they host conversations that are both technically useful and personally inspiring, as guests share the myriad ways that seeds are at the center of our lives as growers and eaters. If you're interested in hearing from people who are passionate about saving, stewarding, and sharing seed, subscribe to Seedheads in your favorite podcast app, or go to seedsecurity.ca/podcast and get started with seasons 1 and 2 of Seedheads today. Seedheads is a podcast inspired by Canadian seed growers and hosted by the Bauta Family Initiative on Canadian Seed Security, a program of seed change. Season 3 is coming in 2022, as always, with episodes in French and English. I'm subscribed to the Seedhead podcast, and I can't wait to listen to Season 3. Back to the show. So, Kristyn Leach, welcome to the Seed Growers Podcast.
Thank you, Dan. It's really nice to be here.
I've been following your work on Instagram and through different podcasts and conferences for a couple of years now, and I'm really, really excited to actually get to talk to you and to talk about seeds and shop.
Thank you for organizing this podcast. And yeah, likewise, I've just been a big fan of all the things, the information you put out there and the things that you're teaching and resourcing farmers with. So yeah, it's nice to, quote unquote, meet.
Well, it's a pleasure. So you're based in California, which is a very different season than I'm farming in, and that some of the listeners are farming in. Would you like to describe what your season is like overall, so that people can get an idea how your seed systems are fitting into that as we go through the conversation?
Yeah, certainly. So I'm in California and I'm in the Central Valley. And, the kind of one of the names of this place, like our county is called Yolo County, and Yolo is sort of a version of a Patwin word that means a place abounding with rushes. And so if you can kind of imagine, like, this is, a valley really carved out and shaped by a lot of the waterways, and we're in the western part of the Sacramento Valley. And so it's just a really beautiful ecosystem. It's just oaky chaparral and a grassland savanna. And we're about 20 minutes outside of Davis. Realistically, we're in one of the kind of great seed growing regions probably in the world, just because I would qualify that with when there is the availability of water, which is probably one of our most pressing issues in the West. But it's a beautiful Mediterranean climate. So historically, this has been a really robust seed region. In the surrounding areas of our county, you see seed campuses for most of the kind of big multinational seed companies that exist. So, if I have to go to the landfill, I pass Syngenta, I pass Monsanto, and then, lots of other independent seed companies as well, and lots of breeding work, of course, shaped in large part because of our proximity to UC Davis. So in terms of seasonality, we have, we're frost free, I would say, definitively from like the beginning of May through usually Thanksgiving. And so, kind of a really nice long season. We can grow year round as well. We can overwinter a lot of biennial crops. We don't have to kind of pull them out and store them, but there's still enough cold that those crops can be properly fertilized. So we have a lot of great conditions, and of course those conditions are changing rapidly and not in super linear ways, and so we're starting to see some shifts in that, just in regards to drought, more extreme heat. So we're seeing kind of more and more days that are above 110 degrees each year, and depending on where your crops are at when that heat starts setting in, we're starting to see different outcomes in terms of just, how pollen is produced, the stickiness of that pollen, how effectively seeds set in different crops, given how stressful those temperatures are. And then, of course, water becoming a resource that has been really taken for granted and exploited, and now is increasingly unavailable. And the water that we do have, the water quality is certainly being impacted. So that's kind of the bird's eye view of our area, which is to say, seed has long been a very big part of shaping the agricultural economy of this region, but it faces an uncertain future, certainly.
So it sounds so you're in a good seed growing area, which is good for somebody who's become a seed grower, as long as you got the water. It sounds like. Your summers then must be fairly dry, and it's fairly easy to dry down seed in the field.
Yeah, it's incredibly dry. And again, we're in a really kind of nice microclimate where we are, just because we have a kind of cooling delta breeze, the night times cool down quite nicely. And so, in terms of things like beans that usually require that sort of temperature differential, we can have a lot of successful seed growing of practically anything. Yeah, most annual crops like will thrive here. So yeah, hot and very dry. And so, if you can irrigate, you kind of really have at least the illusion of all of that control. So we can dry down crops pretty much all the way in the field. We only really bring in dry seeded crops when there's mostly predation issues, just, birds and other hungry creatures around our farm.
How is your spring season going so far? I think it might have been in the No-Till Growers podcast. I heard you describing, I can't remember if it's May Madness or March Madness, just that, that transition period. So how mad is this spring?
Oh, Dan. Well, I guess in the past 2 years, it feels like the madness has known no bounds. And so, yeah, it is typically May Madness that my household and close friends sort of brace for. And it's going okay. We're like 5 years into my lease at our new farm. And so I had been at one place for 7 years and moved 5 years ago. And we're about halfway through our 10-year lease term here. And we're just really wrapping our minds around the different issues we've been facing. This is the first year where I feel at least that confidence of familiarity with this place a little bit more. In the first couple of years, you're just figuring out how all of your systems are sort of calibrating to, the bigger systems that you're integrating your farm within. And I think it's just each season is chipped away at learning and seeing problems emerge or evolve. And this is probably the first season where, yeah, I think I feel a sense of, I'm not sure if it's calm or if it's just sheer exhaustion, but I feel like for me, the big lesson was we have like pretty much our major problem was symphalans. So those little nasty soil dwellers that eat the root hairs off of our crops, typically in soils like ours in the West. And then last year we had a big spike in the salinity of our groundwater, which again is impacting a lot of places in California pretty rapidly. So just because of the demand and the overdraft of our groundwater resources, a typical rotation here was canning tomatoes, wheat, and sunflowers. But as the market has shifted, like pretty much most of the ground is being flipped into predominantly almonds. And so it's just much higher water demand. And so, it feels like the past couple years, like each spring, as I sort of made a strategy and thought, the big issue with symphalans is all of my kind of early season summer crops that went in the field, over 60% of them would just die because they couldn't develop any root pressure. And typically, like some of my bridge crops, they're pretty standard: summer squash, different cucurbits, tomatoes. And since the symphalan issue inhibited us getting in like kind of early in the spring, last year I had the idea like, okay, like I've got to switch gears. I need to just put things out a little bit later when the symphalan pressure decreases once it's really hot. So my bridge crops, I'm going to go big on herbs because those have really good margins for us. If I can get those in a little earlier, they're a little less susceptible to symphalans. So it's like, great, I've got my plan. I'm trying to kind of like work with what I've got. I'm trying to just learn and integrate all of this information. And then the water issue, unfortunately, had this completely inverse correlation where the crops that, we had documented as being less just totally vulnerable to symphalans ended up being the most vulnerable to the salts in the water. So yeah, crops that are, pretty important to me anyway. all mint family things, and especially just with how much perilla we grow. And that was just the most affected. So with that, just started noticing like really poor root volume. Again, no fine root hairs, like the roots were kind of like just brown and burned. So the last year, by the time we realized that the problem was the water, and we had done like a bunch of replicated experiments to just eliminate possible causes and arriving at very clearly that the problem was the water, we were already in the end of May. So reseeding, just gets pretty challenging at that time. And so last year was just really, really kind of brutally hard. And this year, spending more time again, just doing lots of experiments, trying to figure out just ways of dealing with the groundwater issues. So yes, I think the madness is still definitely looming right on the horizon, but I don't know if how challenging the past couple of years have been. Have just kind of worn me down to the point where I'm just too tired to get as worked up, or if I found some sort of inner Taoist that is just weathering it all a little bit better. But my toddler is turning 2 this June too, and so as you know, it's also just is a next level of physical exhaustion. So I would say I'm doing okay, and it is humbling to see how much time it takes to just kind of adequately even understand the problems that you're working with. So I think the thing I feel positive about is I at least am looking at all the cards I've been dealt now, and I don't think there's another curveball. I think having a persistent soil pest and salty groundwater feels like like a pretty full docket of problems to deal with.
That does sound like quite a handful, and it sounds like an interesting balancing from one challenge to the other. So you're a farmer and you're a seed grower, but you also, it sounds like Second Generation Seeds is becoming more and more of a seed company. Am I right about understanding that?
Yes, that's correct. So Second Generation, it started as a project and a sort of collection within Kitazawa Seed, which was based in Oakland. And that was born mostly from just having the opportunity, because I had been doing some seed growing and doing all the field trials for Kitazawa. So kind of just assessing different varieties for small scale farmers in particular. But Kitazawa sold, we were informed they were selling the company last year. Initially we had thought we would have this seed season still just selling through them, but they ended up selling by the end of the year. So we had to really pretty quickly, kind of launch our own sort of commerce platform and figure out doing the fulfillment. So definitely a lot of a big learning curve, a very hectic winter, and certainly I would admit things that I'm not great at and I don't love doing, like just figuring out the United States Postal Service and e-commerce platforms and things like that. And so it's all in all, I'm happy with how this sort of first year of us just being independent have been. And I think there's a lot of exciting opportunities and directions that a lot of the farmers that we're working with now are interested in. But definitely, this move to being a seed company wasn't totally deliberate. It was definitely a little bit reactionary, just with a lot of things just out of our control.
The opportunity, I don't know if you call it the opportunity, but the just the circumstances made this happen. And you're not alone. There's a number of other farmers that you're working with in Second Generation Seeds. But how much of the office work or warehouse work do you do yourself, or is this something that's split with other farmers, or do you have hired staff that's doing that?
Yeah, I mean, we don't have anything. When I saw your question, I'm like, oh, the fun seed warehouse stuff. I was like, well, it's a room in our house and part of our garage. But yeah, I mean, it's a big shift for me because I have confidence in my competence as a farmer and seed grower, but I don't really claim to be even like in my commercial, like the fresh market production. Like, I don't think anyone has ever accused me of being like a very wise business person. And so launching a second actual like business enterprise, I think mostly people who know me find it very amusing, like that now I'm maybe a serial entrepreneur. And so, yeah, but the good thing is we have been working towards being collectively organized. And the important thing for me was just believing in, for small scale growers, the way that we can achieve scale that both like helps us really steward the plant genetics that are really important to us, do really effective, robust trials where we can, observe what are actual like heritable gains. The ways that we can do all of this to scale is to scale horizontally and to be really decentralized. And so for me, the goal and aspiration was always to just really lift up like how many amazing different types of farmers are out there. And we are working predominantly with Asian and Palestinian, Western Asian communities doing seed preservation projects. So we've been just kind of slowly, building those relationships, building that trust, and it's all collectively organized from a place of sharing opportunities to do, collaborative trials, helping each other with seed grow outs, testing things across regions so that we can really assess like how things are adapting or being improved for either different agronomic traits, different regional climatic traits, different cultural, sensory, and culinary traits. In terms of the business side of that, it right now is just me doing things probably in a infuriatingly inefficient way to somebody who knows how to run a really good seed company, just because the seeds that we're selling, I think it is still a small collection, just because up until last year, we've been trying to prep and giving people these runways to be doing seed projects and thinking about these kind of really intentional commercialization pipelines, essentially. And just with how fast everything happened last year, we just didn't want to rush to add things or try to bulk up a catalog in ways that just didn't fit with what our principles are. So we mostly just kept everything the same, and we just released independently the varieties I had been selling through Kitazawa. And so, I think people, when they heard, oh, you have this new seed company, it was like, oh, there's 8 varieties, like it's just kind of confusing. But it is like, me personally, and I think the way we're trying to build things and the way the other farmers are is just being very, very deliberate, and really like having a lot of confidence. Like all the seeds that I sell through second generation are seeds that I care about very deeply, and that I've spent years really understanding like their behaviors, their preferences, and I could speak to why it like is selected for small scale farming systems, or selected for kind of like being representative and being really beloved by like Korean American point of view. So all of those things, like we're just trying to ensure that our catalog in some ways is always going to be pretty small. And when I spoke with growers, when we heard that Kitazawa was going to be sold and it wasn't going to be like an Asian American owned seed company anymore, what I had said was like, we can either be second generation, like a growers collaborative, and we, find seed companies that also kind of house our collections or do the fulfillment for us and distribute our seeds. And we really focus on the research and development and growing. But I think a lot of people like felt emotionally some sort of way about Kitazawa's transition. And I think people just felt like, no, there's got to be something else. There has to be something else that we can build from here that hopefully will last the 100 years Kitazawa did. That is just really buy-in for, I think, the communities that we're really working with. It was heartening to me, and also just like, yikes, we've got to, this is now a lot of work. So right now it is all like I hand stamp the envelopes with rubber stamps that we make. And like every single seed packet we send out, I touch like 4 or 5 times, which is just insane from a production point of view. Every time I'm like, okay, now I'm just putting the sticker on. Now I'm packing it in the envelope. So yeah, everything is just, at nighttime after the farm, just coming home, stamping, packing, sending out, writing little notes to everybody, bringing them to the post office, which in our town, like our post office is only open for 4 hours a day, 5 days a week. So just lots of challenges to kind of work around. And we're just trying to figure out over the next couple of years. It's easy to bemoan like capitalism and feel like a martyr as like an anti-capitalist entrepreneur, but this is the path that we're going on. But it is just challenging in terms of like still finding that balancing act of truly believing in like a sacredness to these seeds that we're working with and the importance of that, and just trying to figure out like being farmer led and wanting this to really actually provide an economic boost to these farmers, and to think of the ways that it can be, another market channel for diversified farmers. Like I think a lot of those, the nuts and bolts of it, in terms of small farm economics, are really quite meaningful. But again, it's just trying to map out how we're going to do that, and not having like, we've gotten a lot of very friendly offers to talk through things with other small seed companies. And we're just really trying to kind of, integrate all of that information and think about, just proceeding kind of in the way that we want to. So right now, I think the hardest thing for me is, the wintertime, most of my income was based on seed sales, filling that really nice seasonal niche of being like, oh, great. I start selling seeds in January, and that floats me through most of spring, just having some income. And right now, all of that income, we're just keeping and reinvesting in second generation, just to hopefully, later in the season, be able to provide like advances on seed contracts to other growers, and trying to work out as we're building our trials and breeding network, just ways to compensate farmers for doing research that gets, I think, undervalued or completely not compensated for, when it really is, like sometimes multiple years needing to commit to a certain level of failure to see how things are advancing. So I'm interested in a lot of how to make those things work, while also just considering the weight of like stewarding these varieties. And to be totally honest, like when I was even working with Kitazawa, there were certain things like, oh, some of these crops are like so special, they feel like family. And it did kind of feel weird to put any sort of price on it or to commercialize it. And I think for me, like, it's not to say that it's not actually just complicated and murky, but I think part of it was just that Kitazawa was such a lamppost for me. Like when I found Kitazawa, it really altered my life. For me, like just to see some of those varieties and to see like Korean names like on a page in their catalog, for me, it was just a matter of outreach and to be like, let's just find our community in the ways that we can right now. And Kitazawa was such a great platform for that, in the way that I hope second generation can grow to be. But in so many ways, it's just about knowing how much it meant for me to find these varieties and just trying to think about, these similar ways to just kind of like stick our heads up and see like who else is out there, and to present some visibility to people. And I think that has been, I won't lie, this winter definitely, while I was just sitting, packing orders, staring at a computer way more than I thought would ever be tolerable, the thing that really kept us going was just this feeling of, people just like responded so strongly. People shared so many personal stories. We had lots of people we could see were just shipping seeds to like their family. Like people were addressing like the packages just to an appa, like mom and dad. So I think just seeing the richness of being like, oh, these people don't really know me personally. They're just responding to seeing these seeds out there. It sounds corny, and I'm sure cynical people will just be like, that doesn't make it not a transaction, but it doesn't feel just purely transactional, I guess is what I would say. And so I think it has felt like this is a worthwhile direction to sort of go in. And for me, I'm just excited to build that beyond, like my microcosm of being really invested in Korean culture, Korean American communities.
Well, it sounds like I'm going to have to interview you again in 3 to 5 years to see what those 8 varieties have blossomed into, and to see where your business is at next. So I'm really excited for that conversation.
Well, hopefully, yeah. Like somewhere between going down in flames and going on Shark Tank and bringing Mark Cuban in as an investor, hopefully we'll find some middle ground of success we can be happy about.
That sounds like a good plan. So I think I should move away from the seed company and start asking you a bit more about your farm. Do you want to tell me or do you want to describe what your farm looks like, or how big it is, what kind of infrastructure is on your farm?
Yeah, definitely. So I lease land from a person who grows predominantly olives and presses olive oil. I lease about 5 acres within a 20-acre property where my landlords live. And they have a bunch of infrastructure for the olive business. So they have a mill on the premises and a commercial kitchen. So there's just about 5 acres of open ground, and that's what I grow on. It's pretty beautiful. I mean, just kind of within all of these olive trees. And so we do have use of, seasonally during the summer, like we can use some space, like they have a walk-in cooler. I have a greenhouse of my own that I built before I moved out there. So we just have one 70-foot long greenhouse that's just for seedling production in the spring. And then we throw some dark tarps over it, and that's where we dry down seed crops throughout the summer and fall. And then other than that, it's pretty bare bones. Like we don't have electricity. And so, I have I rent a house in Davis where we live. And we just moved in here and we have a garage. And so we have a lot of our seed cleaning stuff is now just at my home. So we have like a small clipper, and then pretty much everything else is done by hand. So seed screens, little fans, things like that. We do use tractors, and we mostly focus on doing like essentially a form of like strip tillage or like small vertical tillage. And so we built some different implements to just essentially cut like a 4-inch wide furrow. And then everything else kind of just stays intact. And we just manage like a cereal heavy cover crop as a mulch and surface residue.
So that 4-inch, so are you row cropping as opposed to like working in beds?
Yes, we're just row cropping. I mean, because again, we're in this super dry climate, like all the benefits of a raised bed are like exactly what we don't want. So we actually, want our plant roots kind of going down below kind of the surface. And again, yeah, like our sort of minimal tillage system is really based in replacing mechanical tillage with other types of aeration, microbial foods, different types of things to be digested, all of those functions being performed mostly by keeping our root mass intact. So just pretty much relying on that breakdown at a kind of high carbon to nitrogen ratio. Again, like we're 5 years in and just starting to see like that coming together where of course, all that root matter takes quite a while to break down, and we're not incorporating any of like that kind of lush, tender green matter from our cover crop. And so, we've had this kind of long timeline for building that organic matter that's just starting to kick in. But yeah, if you come to the farm, it's just these small furrows, and then we pull the straw just kind of over the base of the plant, so everything is mulched. And then all the pathways, everything, you're just kind of walking on kind of just different layers of this dried residue that starts breaking down once we get some rain in the fall.
Do you have much of a rotation in your 5 acres?
Yes. So different crops, we kind of have like a distinct little rotation amongst different crops, just because it seems like some of them like make for these really nice relays. So like some of the crops we grow the most of kind of just work in a rotation with each other where because we have this sort of like long dry season, we grow a lot of things that just kind of we've selected for to just be like super sturdy and then just kind of produce. So we wanted to really minimize the amount of successions that we put in. So a lot of our crops, it's kind of one for one. It's like, one kind of main long season summer crop goes in, and then just it gets a winter cover crop. And so we're not doing a ton of flipping rows, not a lot of successions of different crops. And so we'll have, soybeans, a winter cover crop. After that, we'll put in our melons that get intercropped with cosmos. Then after that, it gets like more kind of a radish cover crop with some different native wildflowers. That'll go fallow through spring, midsummer time. And then the following winter, we'll put in another cover crop after that. And then we put in our perilla, then we put in corn after that. So we have rotations where it's just kind of like everything seems to be able to like relay something from season to season, basically. And that includes like our winter cover crops, like rotating between different types of cereal grasses and legumes with native wildflowers, and then sometimes using things like the tillage daikon radish. And so just to kind of have all of those things complement one another. So we have things blocked out. Each field is roughly 1 acre. And then that gets broken up into quarter-acre plots. And so it's just kind of quarter-acre blocks that get rotated in their kind of little distinct rotation with whatever other crops they go with.
Amidst all these crops, so I know that you grow seed, and that's obviously why you're here. And I know that you started as a fresh market grower. Do you still grow vegetables, or how important are vegetables in your market plan at this point?
Oh yeah, still very important. I mean, I'm just a very food motivated human. And so, I really love the fresh market side. And a lot of the work that we're doing with the seeds, like I think because it's a little different, we're not just doing seed on contract for other companies. A lot of it is still doing kind of like breeding, adaptation work, and just trials work. So the fresh market side is like really important to the seed work. So they're really enmeshed in a way that I think makes it complicated to kind of parse out and monetize them really distinctly, but it makes it so that they both sort of service each other. So the fresh market side is really important just because we can do a vegetable box or a CSA style to some different families and also use that as part of our like culinary evaluations for breeding different crops or doing our trials. So we try to involve like all the people that consume the fresh market produce in some way, like having them understand the ways that their experience is related to the seed preservation or evolution side of it. I can't give a clear, like, it's not like it's broken up into a really neat percentage of what's for fresh market and what's for seed, because again, they just kind of really overlap. But we still, we have a partnership with a restaurant group in San Francisco. We still provide, a lot of the produce just goes directly to them.
And is that Namu?
It is, yeah. So they have a restaurant still in the city, and they have a farmer's market stand. We've worked together now for over 10 years, and they're just kind of good thought partners in that regard as well. And so, we still work with a lot of chefs to do, again, these different trials and doing culinary tastings and things like that.
Hey, you all, Farmer Jesse here. The goal of no-till growers is to help produce and create valuable niche content like what you're listening to now. We create several different podcasts, from the Winter Growers podcast hosted by Clara Coleman to the Collaborative Farming podcast with host Jackson Roulette and many more. We produce videos at the No-Till Growers YouTube channel, including farm tours and crop-specific breakdowns. And our entire model is to create helpful, valuable farming content that is free and open to the public, so anyone, anywhere can use it. So if you appreciate that and our work, or are simply enjoying this show, please consider signing up to be a patron at patreon.com/no-tillgrowers. There are also other support options at no-tillgrowers.com, or you can even purchase a copy of my book, The Living Soil Handbook, because when you purchase it directly from no-tillgrowers.com specifically, the proceeds go to making you more amazing content like this. Okay, that's my spiel. Thanks, you all. Back to the show.
So I've heard you mention baskets, vegetable baskets, right in this conversation, and I've also heard you talk about CSA baskets in other interviews. And there's a Seed Steward CSA project, and so I'm curious if you have a CSA on your actual farm, or if it's more the Seed Steward project that might be your CSA, and if that's still running. And it also seems to have evolved a lot over the couple iterations I've heard about. So I'd love you to tell me a little bit more about that.
Yeah, definitely. So in 2020, like as the world totally shifted, that thing that happened, I, like everybody else, did shift and move into doing a CSA box. And we ended up doing it in a way, again, because, so here's the thing for me, like as a seed grower, the CSA was never like a desirable direction for me to go into as I moved more into seed production, just because at any given time, like I'm not rotating crops out quickly enough. And so many things, again, are staying in my field for pretty much the duration of the whole season. So I couldn't come up with like a really robust competitive CSA box, especially since in California too, there's like so many box aggregators. And when it comes down to it, like just in terms of the logistics load, so many companies and farms could do it a lot better than I could, where, now customers, you can cherry pick everything you want for your box. It gets delivered to your doorstep at whatever time of day you need it to. So I think, for a while, like it felt like small farms, it's like CSA was increasingly becoming like kind of a challenging beast to wrangle. And so now, like suddenly to pivot into that, because there was such a spike in demand, there was so much uncertainty, and especially because the hospitality industry just was decimated. So I think, we started to consider like, okay, there's clearly this need now where people are really interested, like people getting in touch about a CSA, but what can we do where we're like kind of growing more volume of less varieties, just because that's sort of the way it goes with doing more of the seed production and especially some of the breeding, because with even like genetic maintenance or seed preservation, that minimum viable population, once that starts to come into play on a small scale farm, for a lot of our seed crops, we are growing, a population that's like 2 or 3 times the size of how many plants we need for the quantity of seed we need to harvest, just so that we can know we have the cream of the crop, right? And to know that we have a large enough population to keep the genetics really robust. And so what that means is just, like 5 acres gets used up pretty fast when you need a minimum population of 1,000 plants, just for those reasons. So we started a program called Seed Stewards. How can we get people engaged in understanding the variation that exists even within crops that are seen as a monolith? So it's an outlandish idea, because when you spell it out, I was like, I'm going to do a box that, like one box, the theme was just all perilla. And it was, Korean perilla, Japanese perilla, Vietnamese perilla. And, like other farmers I know just say like, oh, I get like all these complaints about too many herbs in the box this week, da 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 da. here I am having the nerve to give somebody, 2 weeks of a box that is just herbs. But it was coupled with different interactive activities and curriculum. And then we hosted 2 monthly virtual potlucks where we talked a lot about that botany, and where we talked about just this sense of, being able to give people really, even like breeding produce. So we are doing a Korean summer squash breeding project, and we gave people like small samples of different populations within that. So again, you're getting one CSA box and it's pretty much all summer squash, but you're getting like the leaves, the flowers, the fruit itself, and all of it is distinguished by like the different sibling populations. So we're, essentially every CSA box became like a little science fair where they were interacting a lot with the farm. And also we just created an online platform for families in our CSA to interact with each other, talk about what they're doing with the boxes. And then we had templates for that culinary evaluation where we got information back about just how our community could shape selection criteria. And at the same time, the thing that was really heartening was we, at a time where like CSA was moving into this prioritizing like maximum convenience, we have lots of meal boxes where everything, all the mise en place is kind of done for you. Like everything is focused on like streamlined efficiency of time. But in our box, like what we wanted to foster was like, make that time meaningful, like take more time, like make one really big meal with your family each week. And we'll have this virtual potluck where we come together and we like try to share that meal in this weird virtual realm that we're all existing in now. But we tried to give like a richness to the experience that would make up for the fact that we were like, one, asking our participants to actually do more work. We gave them community interview templates. We asked them to like, for each box to find somebody who identified strongly with that crop and say like, what are really culturally specific selection traits, for something like Korean summer squash. We asked people to participate in like these virtual conversations and have these classes and fill out templates. And it almost felt like by asking more, people got more out of it, where it was like, yeah, we're asking you to like sit around and geek out with your families at the dinner table. But it felt like it just was a catalyst to, a different way of enriching that time, of saying like, take more time, but let's just make that time really enjoyable and like a way to savor it. So that was really interesting to me, just because I felt like it could have gone either way, where it's like, oh, people have so much virtual fatigue and just people are more stressed out than ever. But again, it was pretty meaningful. And that first year we did it specifically in a cohort with, kind of families that were mixed, but all of them had a connection to either like Korean, Filipino, or Vietnamese communities, because we had already like formations of like adult organizers working across those different communities. So it was just like designed to foster that cross-cultural sharing for each community, to try to elicit like intergenerational conversations by having kids like interview elders, and just also doing something that I think is useful for CSAs, where instead of me just Googling like, oh, I've got all this bitter melon, how do I get people excited to eat bitter melon? Having a collective platform where families, so the Korean families, bitter melon isn't something that's super familiar. It isn't like a super traditional Korean crop, but for the Filipino and Vietnamese families, it was. And so just anytime a crop wasn't familiar to one of those communities, it was like not only familiar, but like very cherished by at least one of the other communities. And so just that sharing that happened, like for me, that my biggest accomplishment was like, oh, some of the families were just asking like, oh, we ran out of bitter melon really early in the week last week. Can you like put even more in? Or, if that crop isn't being focused on next week, could we have a little on the side? And so for me, I was like, this is so great that, people are getting a platform to express like what they love about their foods, how it relates to their culture. And the same as if you go to a meal at somebody's house and they make you something that's not familiar, or something that you may not pick up at a supermarket, or even if you're given it in your CSA box, might be intimidated. You may try to cook it once and not know a great way to prepare it, have a bad experience, never want to cook it again. And you eat it prepared by somebody who actually loves it, it's just going to be delicious. And when you hear somebody like talking about why they love it, I think it gives you a different point of introduction and just a different reason to feel protective, because then you think, oh, well, this person I care about cares about this crop. There's just like a different level of regard, I think, for it. So after the success of that first year, just being like, okay, well, we did this kind of weird thing. We asked a lot of people, and it was like clearly had a place, and the way it was responded to like shows that it's filling a need. Let's just build upon that. So last year had organized with 5 other farmers, and the idea was, again, like, well, what if all our CSAs link up? And then it helps alleviate some of the redundancies, this like weird duplicative, like, Sunday night that everyone dreads of writing the newsletter for their CSA members. Everybody's looking up recipes at the same time, trying to come up with something to say. What if this platform reduces some of the communications burden for each individual farmer, because all our respective memberships come together and can engage in this conversation and be sharing. So each farmer had a month that was designated to them where they created content that was really focused on a crop that they wanted to highlight, and then partnered with chefs and organizers and other people to do like cook-alongs.
In these baskets, were these baskets then no longer like, it's if there's 5 farms, like were all the farms contributing to the basket during each week also, or is it they were rotating who was doing the baskets?
No, everybody's CSA still remained kind of just their own, but okay. It was like, oh, if all of us are growing like eggplant in August, if some type of eggplant, it doesn't even have to be the same eggplant, is going to go in all of our boxes, then in August, all of the members will have some variety of eggplant in their box. And then one farmer will be kind of like highlighting eggplant through the whole month. And then hopefully having conversations where we can start to discern and compare between, like, oh, my members are getting kamo, like a Japanese heirloom round eggplant. Emily, who's curating Eggplant Month, her members are getting 2 different types of Taiwanese eggplant. So just getting to, again, I think for participants, getting to understand like those preferences, like starting to develop a language and just an ability to articulate flavors and textures, like that sensory experience, how that relates to breeding and selection, just saying like all of the things that you like, that is what plant breeding is at its core. That's how all of our crops are domesticated, because of the things we care about. So it was never aggregating actual produce or being a cooperative sort of CSA box. It was just more developing like a cooperative platform that focused on the storytelling and focused on
the education and community building.
Yeah, exactly.
Is that project still going on? Are you going to repeat that in 2022?
Yeah, we are repeating it, and we're shifting it again. Like most of it now, we're building more regional hubs. So just having farmers like in different clusters based on their region, doing different trials. We're having a multi-year breeding project with saltus, like a stem lettuce, and the trials, we've sent seed out to a number of farmers who are going to trial different varieties as we make crosses based here in California. And then different farmers who are doing the trials are going to like host their own either like tasting events, or the sample produce will like go to their CSAs. So again, Seed Stewards will just be like the place where those conversations get brought together and kind of centralized. So all the evaluations that people are doing, the feedback, online, sort of tasting events can all happen remotely, but then be shared through the network.
Are some of these farms also farms that are part of second generation seeds, or is that a different group of farmers that you're working with?
Yeah, they're all involved with second generation seeds.
It sounds like a really nice group of people that you're working with.
Yeah, it's really amazing. And I think it gives us like a way to build technical skills and provide a lot of support for farmers as we're building this like trials and breeding network. And then also just, for us, it's like really wanting to root all of the parts in the field related to seed work to like a community kind of informing every other step of it. So it's like everything is kind of, just being calibrated based on our community's involvement. So wanting to really formalize and develop like a way for us to have something that goes even beyond like what participatory breeding is right now, to being like not just participatory, but like really, community guided, totally rooted in community, to just say like whose perspectives have been included in the seed industry thus far. Because even a lot of like Asian crops that have been, quote unquote, introduced to.
I'd like to interrupt you a second and just, so you talked about participatory plant breeding, which I'm guessing most people listening don't know that term yet. And so it's, you're trying to get people who are not just academics into the process, like the people who are growing it, people who are eating it. Could you give me an example of what participatory plant breeding might look like with, either specifically with the Seed Steward CSA project or some way that you bring in the eaters with the farmers to make selections or to guide these plants?
Oh, certainly. Yeah. So let's see. So the funnest type of participatory breeding I can think of like always ends in something celebratory and delicious. So we did the Napa Cabbage trials, trying to develop like a strong open pollinated competitor for Napa Cabbage, right? Since predominantly what's available are hybrids. So I had a variety that's like a native landrace from Jeju Island in Korea, a couple other varieties shared by a breeder from Organic Seed Alliance. So we did these trials, grew them out, and then, where our community participated was we harvested them and we hosted like a kimjang, which is like, in Korea, it's like everybody in a village goes and takes turns and does like massive batches of kimchi like for each farm and household. So you just go around, you spend a couple weeks like just rotating through, doing it all together. And so we're like, oh, well, let's do that here. So we had been partnering with a Korean American domestic violence organization in the Bay Area, doing a number of events. And so we started doing annual kimchi making events. And of course, like a lot of people my generation, like really want to learn that skill from like, our aunties. And so we hosted that, having these different cabbage varieties, and then just got a lot of interesting information, like, and things that I wouldn't know because I'm not a master pickler. I have like kind of a child's palate to begin with. And so I really do rely on my community, people who are really talented cooks, people who have that like sensory memory and that deep feeling of like taste as it's related to a sense of home and nostalgia. So that was like, for me, I was like, I feel horticulturally competent in other regards. Like I definitely need to employ some help. And so we just made kimchi and we got feedback, from the older generation about just, oh, we like this cabbage the best. It took 3 times as long to brine, but that low water content means it aged really well. So getting into kind of just like these interesting things that were really like, after a couple of years, it was like, okay, this cabbage is the best for kimchi, and not saying that in some arbitrary way, but saying like, we've done this like several times, we've repeated this process, we're trying to refine and, select in directions based on the traits that someone's telling us they're identifying as being valuable or being more desirable. So just, trying to integrate these different cultural touchstones and these preferences, because again, like that's, plant breeding is super ancient technology. It's been around for a long time. And a lot of the ways that it's been around is just like in these types of conversations and these decisions that are made, about what we care about with the people that we care about. So again, just trying to get back to that place of just saying, like, as so many different food cultures, like we're mostly evolving like in relationship to, climate conditions, and just plants sort of rolling the dice and trying to do lots of interesting things, in the hopes of just like finding people to be accomplices with them. We have like this flourishing of biodiversity because people really did gravitate towards different traits, and so you see different interesting novel characteristics develop, in these sort of regional pockets. So it's just saying, like, as much as we all know that we need to preserve biodiversity, I think that doesn't always get linked to the cultural diversity piece. And it's just saying, it's not just about like the social science of conversations around diversity and equity. It's about the way that that's imprinted in all of us, like this relationship between, the things we find delicious or beautiful or useful, the medicines we've made, like the ways we've found of relating to our environments. So just trying to include more perspectives that have been, either ignored or deliberately dispossessed of having a place and having agency and self-determination in that system. So yeah, like asking, just our surly old Korean ajamas, like, hey, you're the experts here, like, what does a cabbage need to be a good kimchi cabbage? What does a pepper need to, like evoke that sense of familiarity when you open a jar of ground pepper flakes? Just what should it taste like? What should it look like? What is the through line as they kind of evolve in respect to the conditions that are changing and our landscape and the ways that they're changing to like a new home in these different environments? What's the tether that makes all of this still legible to each other, and who are we accountable to?
Why don't we bring this conversation back to the field and talk about the technical part of seed saving? So something that you mentioned earlier is you were talking about how you grow on a piece of land that doesn't have any electricity, and that you're doing all the processing in your garage. And I know how much material can be lugged around as a seed grower, and that thought terrified me. And so I'm curious, what do you do on your farm, and what gets brought to your workshop at home?
Yeah, I mean, fortunately, the good thing about basically being pretty lo-fi is we can get seed like the majority of the way clean at the farm itself. And so it gets a little dicey just in the fall, where it's like we're moving seedlings out and trying to clean up and have things ready to dry down seed crops. But for the most part, between just things that dry in the field, wet seeded crops that we can just process, at the farm in buckets. For the most part, the only thing that I'm taking home to do is like the last 5 to 10% of winnowing and refining from there. Because we just use, pretty standard seed screens in our greenhouse. Again, we just keep it shaded. We pull out remay, kind of like heavy duty remay, kind of just stretch it over our tables and then lie everything banquet style down on those. Just so that there's lots of air circulation. The remay just kind of is nice, it wicks away moisture. And then we do all of the kind of threshing, removing all the seeds at the farm, either on the remay that we use or on tarps. Even just rely on, like, oh, good, there's a relatively windy day, we're going to go winnow our larger seeded crops today. We have small battery powered fans that we use for like some of the smaller smaller crops. And then, yeah, if we need to, we can use the garage just for, the little clipper, or for, having a little bit more flexibility with like the type of fan that we use. But yeah, the operation in terms of like the parts that are mechanized are very minimal. I'm curious, like I'm excited to hear other growers who maybe use different types of equipment for doing the cleaning. But yeah, we get away with doing most of it just with hand labor.
I'd love to go through one crop a little bit more in detail. And before we started the interview, you had suggested that we talk about perilla. So what does perilla seed production look like? I guess you could talk about the growing also, but I'm really curious about the seed extraction and cleaning and all those steps.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I thought to talk about perilla just because it is a crop that I feel like I feel pretty confident in. And I think, as I mentioned before, it's like there wasn't a lot of information when I started my farm about growing it for seed. Like a lot of people just recommended like letting it reseed. But for me, it's like this is the crop that, is most important to us. It's like the crop that like a lot of people just, if they buy one thing from us, it tends to be that. People are just typically excited to see it. And so it's pretty standard. It's dry seeded. I think the main things to know, and I think the thing that's challenging is they're like really highly day length sensitive. For the most part, like the Korean variety, the red leafed, different Chinese or Japanese, Vietnamese, Korean varieties, all flower once their sort of photo period is hit and the days start to shorten. The green curly leaf shiso is a little bit more unpredictable. It doesn't seem like it has a strict photosensitivity, but the rest of them just tend to flower all in sync with one another. So it's important enough to me that that has shaped where I can and cannot foreseeably ever move in my life. And even my spouse knows if she's thinking about suggesting another place that we move to, the first thing she says, it's at this latitude, like that's just something that now, like in our household is like known, like you just have to find out the latitude and, just kind of general duration of the season.
Do you know what the photo period is that's necessary for it to flower?
I'm not entirely sure. I think this year we're trying to have growers actually all compile information in a shared spreadsheet, just because it seems like even in far northern latitudes, like there are certain years where it can successfully make seed. So I'm really curious about it. For us, like mine always tends to flower at the beginning of September. And so like our day length is still probably like around, like 11 hours or something at that point. And so, yeah, I'm not entirely sure how it acts otherwise. And in southern latitudes, like, so for people in Southern California, like LA and San Diego, only certain plants will flower, or some of them like just end up flowering maybe every other year. And so we're going to try to find that out this year. So if anybody is growing perilla and wants to just submit some of that information, we're going to hopefully learn a little bit more about how they behave. But once they start flowering again, like it's not like other plants where you can kind of cut them back to like a node that still shows some like vegetative buds, just because once it's at that reproductive phase, it's not going to actually produce more vegetative growth. And so that's just something that's important that we try to convey to growers is it's really good, which is that you don't really need to successfully plant them. You can just try to grow as much as you think you want for the season, like get the timing right where you get them in as early as they can go in and thrive. But they'll happily produce through the whole season. And ones that go in later, if you are doing successions, like will just put on less vegetative growth before they decide to flower and start to make seed. And it's just important to know, like, there's nothing you can do to change that unless you were really altering the lighting scenario. And so the other thing to remember is, as you get to know them and as they're approaching that reproductive maturity, you want to also keep that in mind with easing up on harvesting the leaves, just so that they have enough surface area to keep photosynthesizing. Just because, again, if you just kind of like strip them up until the point of flowering, you've taken away all of their sort of apparatus for metabolizing food. So it's like, yeah, for me, it's like, I know when I start getting towards September, pretty soon, all of their buds are gonna, be programmed to make an inflorescence and not any more leaves. So when I know we're approaching that time, even though they look so bountiful and bushy, like, we'll tend to back off a little bit, just so that their energy can like really shift effectively and elegantly into making that seed as healthy as possible. So especially once you identify what are your parent plants, sometimes we'll just leave those alone entirely and just harvest from the ones that aren't, for saving seed for planting.
How do you choose the parent plants and how do you mark them?
Yes, so it's kind of just that long math equation. So it starts just right when you're planting. So for, like, pearl is like most things, where it's like capable of outcrossing, but for the most part is pretty self-pollinizing, just the way the flower is structured, and it's pollinated like by bees or other insects. So crossing is like fairly unlikely. So you just sort of plan from there. And for us, probably your minimum viable population, if you're really looking at genetic maintenance, like, you'd probably want to be saving from, I'd say, no fewer than a dozen, but probably what would be better is if you could get, like 50 to be your minimum population size. And we save seed from a little over 100 plants. So knowing that I want like 100 solid plants to harvest seed from, I plant out 1,000, right? So 10 times as much. And then in my greenhouse, I will plant probably like 1,800 to 2,000. So if you think we're starting with 2,000 seeds put in to arrive at roughly 100 plants, saving seed from, like, it's a tiny fraction, but again, you're just trying to kind of like save from the absolute best, and having like casting a wide enough net to make those observations. And so we start like noticing like any interesting developments like in the greenhouse. So I used to direct seed it when I was mostly just saving seed for our own farm and growing it mostly for the fresh market, and then started doing it, raising them as seedlings, just so that you had added layers of just different benchmarks and timing and different little points, little checkpoints to make selections from. So yeah, we look at just fastest to emerge, just like, even just health of the cotyledons, like expanding their first leaf, just any sort of notable characteristics, and we'll kind of consolidate those into flats. And yeah, try to put out just like one solid row that we think like, okay, all of these kind of showed us the best traits up till now in the greenhouse. But then anything else that kind of emerges, like if you see any sort of pressure, because we're surrounded by a lot of canning tomatoes, there's like a period in late fall, right when they're getting ready to flower, that we just like have white fly descend upon us. Because it's like, as soon as the tomatoes are harvested and yanked, those flies, it's like you can almost just see like, this little cloud rise up and then just move. So it just like really looks sometimes like snow has completely covered a lot of our fields. So when you have like just these distinct pest pressures, you start to see some weird things happening. We end up making more selections after that to just see like, oh, who's getting stunted, like who's not, what's going on. And so just, make notes pretty much every week about how everything is behaving. And then to kind of mark plants, we just put flags by them. So just try to make note. And yeah, just plan to put out, about 150 flags just to kind of keep an eye on things. And then, yeah, just take 100 from within that. Yeah, of course, like you're roguing out anything that looks off. So there has been like a couple times where the leaves have gotten a little bit of mutations. Like a friend had sent me a picture. Oh, hey, look, I'm growing a perilla. I was like, oh, I see like 3 mutants in that picture. Like you should rogue those out, where the leaves started to make like almost like a sepal type leaf. So yeah, any sort of development that looks off or yeah, it just seems like it's taking something in a weird direction, we just remove the plant entirely. The good thing about perilla too, like the Korean variety, the seed was actually what it was first domesticated for. So doke like is pressed into an oil. It's used very similar to sesame oil, but it's a really like kind of incredible food because it has I think like one of the highest forms of like plant-based omega-3s, and it's super high in linoleic acid. And so it's just a very, very rich type of fat and oil. And so it's this really kind of nice food product. So we're growing all that massive amount. And just to say that even the plants that we're not saving seed for planting, we can still harvest the seed and use that as a food crop. So it's kind of just, it's really versatile in that way, which has also made it an easy crop to focus on seed, because again, it straddles that line where it's just very generous and very bountiful in terms of the types of food and medicine that it offers as well. So once they start flowering, form a long raceme, once it's pollinated, the flower drops, the ovule basically develops and it looks kind of like a bell. And so the base, the calyx, like really kind of tells you and shows you when the seed is pretty much mature. So you'll see that kind of bell shape take form, and the mouth of it, when the flower first drops, kind of closes up because you think like, oh, the plant is there. It's been pollinated and now it's trying to mature those seeds, those little nutlets in the ovule. So it closes up like, hey, nothing to see here. As the seed is ripening, that mouth starts to open back up and gives you that nice kind of like bell shape. So at a certain point when that mouth is open, you can look inside and you see the 4 distinct seeds really nested in that ovule. And at that point, like also when you look at it from the outside, the seed is like pretty white and starting to turn like grayish brown. So at this point, once that's plumped up, the ovule looks very recognizable as a bell. You look inside, you see the 4 seeds. Any point past that, you can cut it and dry it down, protect it inside. So that's for like if you are in a little bit more northern latitude, you're starting to see rain or frost. At that point, it's safe. We cut them usually at that point and bring them inside just because, again, the seed is super rich. So it's like a bird buffet. In the fall, when I walk through there, if I clap my hands once, it looks like an orchestrated, like, I don't know, wedding event or something where birds are just flying out from every plant. So you can cut them, dry them down, either hang them or just lay them on the side. And then we keep it in the shade because it lets it dry down nice and slow. And then the pigment in the leaf is retained a little bit more. So the dried leaf still looks green with the purple underside. And then that we process as a tea. We drink that through the winter.
From the seed crop, you're able to harvest the leaves also?
Yeah, because we'll just harvest the whole plant at the base, just like a little below the soil surface. And they're quite bushy. And so as the seed is drying down, once we thresh it, we screen it out. We use 3 different screens. So yeah, we just kind of very traditional, just dry it out. You'll start to hear it shaking when they're pretty ready. So then we just lay that on our rime and just usually give it a couple whacks with a piece of bamboo. And for us, like some of the people we talk to, it's like, oh, you just want to get every seed out. So you see a lot of people like kind of wrangling the seed from the flower, just kind of rubbing it between your fingers. But for the best quality seed, like you really just want to take whatever is dropping out. Sometimes we'll let it dry a little bit further and thresh it again to see if any of the later ones fall out easily. But you really just want to take kind of like the heaviest, most ready seed. So when you're cutting it too, like even though they're flowering in sync, they mature flowers, they start flowering and then mature seed, obviously from the bottom up. And so you just kind of like keep track, and we just try to cut plants when like it looks like 85% of them have like hit that maturity. So we maybe lose like the earliest seed at the bottom, just because at that point maybe birds have gotten to them or they drop. But we're looking for just kind of like the widest spectrum and capturing the most seed. So not the earliest and not just waiting until the latest when it's kind of like maybe its energy is petering out. You want to kind of capture, it's like, okay, like really efficiently putting that energy into the seed, threshing them, taking the heaviest. Then we screen it through 3 different sized screens. And we have like a grower's guide on our website that has the actual, the size of the screens to 1/10 of an inch. And so obviously the first screen is catching just like the biggest plant residue. And so all of that we just bag, and that's what we use as tea, because the leaves, parts of the stems, the dried out flower raceme. The second screen is catching just the biggest seed. And then the third screen below that is catching seed as well, and screening out the chaff. But we try to separate the seed into 2 different sizes. So the biggest ones we're saving for planting, and then those sort of like slightly smaller grade are what we end up using as a food product. So you toast them, you can press them into oil, or just kind of we steam it with rice, because again, it's just a really kind of densely nutritious little seed. And again, like I think, even though it's like the economics of how seed integrates with the fresh market is murky to try to monetize, this is one of those crops like chili peppers and things where seed like sort of exist almost like a value-added product. So it just is a generous plant that gives you kind of a multitude of options of just different things, from like the fresh leaves, being kind of the main thing we're growing them for. But because you're giving them, like an extra 6 weeks in the field as they're maturing seed, and you're not harvesting the leaf, not only in addition to the seed that you're saving for planting, or in our case, selling to others, but you're also having like that seed be another kind of unique food product that you also can get a lot of use from, and is just a really kind of a desirable thing for people to see in the market.
And then after that, you bring the seed that you bring the seed back to your garage, and then maybe you run it through a clipper, and then
I just use a fan at that point, just because
they're pretty big and fat.
Yeah, they're pretty big and fat, and so I just have like a small handheld fan and can clean it the rest of the way.
And so I'm curious, what is your germination rate like on seed that you've harvested like that?
For us, like it germinates at pretty much 100%.
That sounds awesome. I think that we're at the limit of growing perilla, and so we have grown a couple times, and our germ rates will be lower. But I'm thinking that it just doesn't have quite enough time. So what you were explaining about it flowering in the fall at a specific point, I recognize that. And
yeah. Like, when does yours flower?
So it's sometime, I think, around mid-September or early to mid-September, I think it flowers on. And so it's tough for us because a lot of our crops come out at the end of August, early September, and we're trying to beat the frost, which is like mid to late September many years. And perilla does not like frost. And so we'll grow it in a separate area that we can kind of hold on to it a little longer, and maybe baby it a bit, but and we have gotten some good crops, but we've also had crops that'll germinate not that great, and they won't hold the germination for very many years. And so I've been trying to figure out that, and I guess the answer is move to California.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think that is the challenge because again, yeah, if it starts getting those really cold temps, and if it is just sort of, like probably like sensing like, okay, it's a real race to the finish line, that's a little dicey. Yeah, the embryo might be like not just fully formed at that point. And so I think it is, yeah, for northern growers, it is kind of a challenge to do it without some level of ability to kind of protect them, yeah, from that frost and give them a little bit of season extension. And the seed actually, like, it is best to buy fresh seed. We sell it through some other people too, and sometimes they've held our seed over, and I've seen people and ask them like, oh, like you are selling our 2-year-old seed for perilla, but it still like is testing at above like 95%. We did experiments, but because it's so oil rich, it goes rancid. So we were trying to test like best ways to hold the seed for at least 2 or 3 years. And I don't love freezing seed, I guess, because I just think like I don't have a sophisticated way to like really freeze and hold a temperature. I just have like my home freezer, and just even judging like old ice cream cartons, like it's clearly not working all that well or that consistent. And so I don't like the idea of, yeah, the cells kind of expanding and contracting and damaging some parts of it. So we've mostly arrived at like treating it almost like coffee, or like rosemary seeds, like other herb seeds that are small and high in volatile oils. So we just try to vacuum seal them. So there's just like totally shut down any respiration potential, totally void of light. Like my personal stock seed, we just keep in like little clay jars, because they do just stay so nice and evenly cool. And we do just keep that, like in the coldest place in our house. But yeah, for the most part, like, and I think so the Korean varieties are like, Perilla frutescens, variety frutescens, and some of the like the red shiso, green shiso, those are like variety crispa or akuda. And some of those, like those also tend to be like smaller, harder seeds. And the seed coat is just harder, and they display more dormancy issues. And so those seeds we always recommend soaking before planting, just because I think people have talked about having a lot of issues with germinating, mostly like the shiso varieties. And it's just because, the seed is harder than like the Korean one is bigger and softer. So yeah, across those different varieties, there's lots of different ways they sort of behave, different levels of like dormancy to break. I think in southern climates, the thing you experience is like without that cold snap, some of that is like what signals like dormancy, like entering and exiting that dormant period. So sometimes in places where you just don't really have a cold winter, you probably do need to do some sort of cold stratification prior to planting. So yeah, you just see all these different ways that like kind of all those cues are playing into like the things you see like in an impactful way, just regarding germination rate and holding the seed over for multiple seasons.
That's a fantastic walkthrough for Perilla. I really thank you so much. I really appreciate that.
Well, I'm sorry, Dan. I don't know how many people have been dying for 30-minute walkthrough of Perilla flowering, but hopefully someone out there is like, finally.
I am sure. I'm sure I'm not the only one who's really happy to hear that conversation. So I think we should start wrapping the conversation up. And I've got a few sort of broader or more philosophical, I've got a few questions to ask you. So to basically inspire other people to take on seed production. And so what would you tell your younger seed-saving self?
That's a good question. Feel like I've had a lot of good fortune in my life where I maybe just a lack of a sense of bountiful options as a young person just made me kind of put one foot in front of the other. But I feel like I've just had a lot of good fortune just come to me I would say, like, thinking about seed, I would probably tell my younger self to just like have more patience. And I think you can feel so much enthusiasm, like, oh, look how much you just love so many different plants. You want to kind of do all the things. But I think I would just sort of remind myself to have patience, and just think of it like with any sort of deep friendship, like, you know, getting to know one plant, like, to a certain degree, like, is enough of a challenge. So I think it's just sort of like to just really take your time and savor just kind of that process. I mean, there's lots of things like as you grow familiar with different crops. Like I look back on pictures from like my first years of farming, and you just see nothing but mistakes. Like there's some times where I think like, oh, like things have just gotten harder. Um, but then when I look back, I'm like, it's like things have gotten harder in a lot of ways. And also just like the more you love something, the more you can kind of see like any minor sign of stress. And, when I look at old photo albums and stuff, I'm like, oh, couldn't you tell like this, that cucumber was stressed, you're overwatering it, or, this thing needs more water, or, oh, that needed, that's showing signs of disease and things you just couldn't really know. But in some ways, I wouldn't tell my younger self any of that because I just think it would spoil so much of just like the slow pace of that journey. Like, there's so much that the joy is just, just making and learning from those mistakes. And yeah, I would just say, kind of just take your time and try to be as sort of devoted and attentive, as possible.
What would you say to fresh market growers to inspire them to start saving seed?
I would say just do it. Like I think there's a lot of things that feel intimidating about it, but I think that, like I just think that being a seedy person, the attentiveness that it like provokes or asks of you, and the accountability, to just care for, a plant many times beyond like what it just when it's most profitable, or when you're kind of reaping a benefit from some part of it, like I think just gives you a more holistic relationship that feels honest. It feels like you'll grow as a farmer, and just as like in your decency as a person. It just builds character, and you just get to be filled with awe. And I think that just in the grind, every small scale farmer, it's like, I know everybody has the May meltdown, and, just to have something that demands like, again, like just kind of like a focus, and for you to have to muster up, like, taking notes and making observations. Like, I think it becomes like a type of practice that gives you unexpected opportunities to just like experience, just the sheer awe of kind of just how magical it is that plants are doing any of the like millions of things that they're doing at any given time. You get to say like, I'm putting on a seed saving hat and a scientist hat, and it gives you an excuse to just like, stare at your plants more often. Like I think it just, it deepens the appreciation you'll feel, the responsibility you'll feel for them, and the things that you'll get to learn from them. If you're questioning, well, seed packet like is $4, compared to, the time and energy it takes to save the seed, $4 doesn't seem incredibly impactful, to have to, negotiate in terms of just purchases for your farm. But if you think about it, just all the other things that come along with that seed, the better, if you do a trial, or you do any sort of seed saving and improvement on your farm, getting to know those seeds, like in some way teaches you about like the architecture of the system on your farm, and how to better optimize things. And so then suddenly, if you start thinking about like being able to use less water, using less fertilizer, you have crops that are like really, really kind of, even inadvertently, you're selecting for just things that thrive with all the idiosyncrasies of your farming system, then it does, become economically meaningful as well. So I think it's, there's probably a whole other conversation. A lot of people you've talked to touched on just how challenging it can be to be a commercial seed producer or contractor. But even if you're just doing it for the sake of your own farm, I think it can be, just one of the more important, economic levers to activate for like your farm's economic efficiency.
Well, thank you, Kristyn, so much for the time and for sharing all your information with me and all the listeners. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks so much, Dan, for having me on.
And I'll come back in 3 to 5 years to find out how second generation seeds is doing.
Oh, yeah, sounds good.
Great. Well, if you want to turn back the video, we can wrap this up pretty quickly. I know I heard somebody in your background who
Oh, yeah.
And that's episode 3 of the Seed Growers Podcast. A huge thanks to Kristyn Leach for coming on this podcast to talk seeds. You can follow Namu Farm on Instagram. You can find out more about second generation seeds and peruse their seed catalog at secondgenerationseeds.com. A huge thanks to Sophie Sedalton for the theme music. You can hear more of their music at sophiesedalton.com. The Seed Growers Podcast is produced in part by No-Till Growers with the help of our sponsors, the Bauta Family Initiative on Canadian Seed Security and the Organic Seed Alliance. A huge thanks to Jackson Roulette of No-Till Growers for all the post-production and getting this episode into your ears. I hope you're also listening to Jackson's Collaborative Farming Podcast. You can find more seed growing resources on my blog at goingtoseed.net. While you're there, you can subscribe to my newsletter full of seed growing, crop planning, and farm spreadsheets. If you haven't already subscribed to this podcast, now's the time. That way, you won't miss next week's episode. Until then, happy farming. In the EFAO presentation, you mentioned you're a big sci-fi reader.
Oh,
I think you even had a quote from Ursula K. Le Guin in there.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I love Ursula.
Are there any specific, is she your favorite, or are there other authors that you really like?
She may be my favorite, or she's the one that I think for people who are spending time on the farm, like it feels like she is at least the only required reading. So yeah, I feel like her sort of books are so expansive, and I think it has that blend of fantasy and sci-fi that I really like. So
is there any specific one that's required reading on the farm?
I think just the whole Earthsea series, just because it feels like, I think the quote that I had in that slideshow is probably from there. And it feels just sort of the most useful in terms of, I think talking about kind of like principles of natural farming to me, like feel very expressed in how she describes the sort of equanimity and balance that the world is striving for, and how the activities of a young wizard feel very aligned with the activities of a young farmer.
I like that. I've only read the first of the Earthsea books, but maybe I should read the others and look at it through that lens.
Yeah.